There are a couple more passages in chapter 2 that I think are worth our attention. Just sort of amplifying what I've already mentioned in the first, but let's go to 39, first full paragraph. The sense of infinity that so intrigued Reinhold Niebuhr. By the way, let me just tell you real quick, pause here. Reinhold Niebuhr was an extremely influential, I think of him more as a social ethicist than a theologian. He certainly had plenty to say theologically, but I think most of his interests were toward politics and society, American society. He was the son of a German Lutheran immigrant pastor. I think he grew up in St. Louis. But anyway, part of the deal is that he has a brother, or had a brother as well. I think I mentioned this in class. H. Richard Niebuhr, who, for my money, was, well, I'll just say a better theologian. Certainly more classically oriented toward theology per se than his brother Reinhold. Reinhold is the more famous of the two, but both were quite influential, made their own marks. This, of course, again here, Marjorie's discussing the more famous of the two, Reinhold Niebuhr. After that, I think there's a sister, I want to say Ursula, who was a religion writer, that is for, major newspaper kind of stuff, magazines. So the Niebuhr name was pretty widespread throughout 20th century American scene and beyond America. I'll add one more thing. Reinhold Niebuhr is typically the one to whom the Serenity Prayer is attributed. I think that's on fairly good historical grounds, but God grant me that one. Okay. All right. So the sense of infinity that so intrigued Niebuhr in self-transcendence can easily be deduced from the fullness of relation through which the self is formed. The fullness of all this relation, right? The self is formed in creative responsiveness to the influences received from the whole world. You could really say from the entire history of the world, right, to some extent. And as we have seen, finitude is a form of infinity, or at least, again, a kind of practical infinity. You can't put a limit on the number of finite objects, events, relations that sort of go into the making of the universe that we indwell. But while the self emerges in response to these influences, it is impossible ever to bring all these influences to awareness. Sure. There is always that which eludes us. In fact, I suspect that most of it eludes us. There is always that which eludes us. We are not self-contained. It seems simple, but it's so powerful, and I think so deeply true. We are essentially each an open self embedded within a world touched by infinity. Thus, there is a more than to consciousness that is always intuited but never grasped. We sense the infinity in which we participate. Again, all of this is to try to play out an idea of we'll say, creation / nature that beckons us toward considering its own infinity, such that we need not think simply about rebelling against God like sort of above. She's not going to really want to think about God as being above anyway. But in fact, as that sin arises, makes its place, its home within this dense history of relationships and becoming that is our world. In fact, she says basically that, but let's look at 42, top paragraph. Niebuhr's understanding of self-transcendence, that is, of our capacity to think beyond myself, to be aware of myself, to long to become something more different or better, as being rooted in the infinity of God, created a, quote, vertical understanding of the self as spirit, and that led to a notion of sin as primarily against God. So it's my spiritual rebellion against, the Creator. An understanding of self-transcendence, though located in the infinity within nature, creates a horizontal understanding of the self, and therefore leads to a notion of sin defined in and through the limitations suggested by that horizon. Good stuff here. I don't want to, I think we're getting the basic idea. In fact, that may be, I felt like there was maybe one other, well, let's do this one, and then we'll be done with this chapter as far as the big points. First full paragraph on page 43. Again, Suchocki has a footnote earlier where she discusses both the terms process theology and relational theology, and she's and I like the choice of relational in many ways. That's kind of the way she's going. But so when she says on 43, right above that first full paragraph, each person is a self in and through relation. I know that probably doesn't surprise you too much, but this was kind of revolution that occurred in the 20th century in psychology, social psychology. I know there was a guy named George Herbert Mead. I remember learning about him in college, who was very big on this sort of the relational self. In philosophy, we probably think most quickly of Martin Buber. Some of you at least know a little bit about him, this Jewish philosopher that wrote the classic book, Ich und Du, I and You. You get the relational right there in the title, right? And Buber's relational philosophy was extremely impactful in the 20th century. A lot of influence on 20th century theology. And so there are these waves of kind of revolution about what is a self. What does it mean to be a self that occurred, I would say, throughout the 20th century, and we're still sort of riding on that crest in many ways. So the next paragraph, when then one responds to relation, this would be to any relation, and we're always in the midst of them, yes? By violating the well-being of another, one has lessened the richness of experience not only for the other, but also for all, including oneself, who exist interdependently with that other. Given the openness of interdependent existence that is always flowing, always changing, relationships always becoming different and new and more multiple, and given that openness, it is impossible to violate one without having an effect upon all. Thus, any single violation has communal effects. The same is true with regard to one's relation to the world of nature. To violate any aspect of the well-being of nature is to violate the well-being of all, including the self, who are interdependent with that aspect of nature. In fact, while she is distinguishing between, relationships to other humans and the world of nature, in the final analysis, these cannot be so neatly distinguished. They can be distinguished on the page of paper, but not anywhere else. Every violation has individual and social effects. If one can presuppose that well-being is better than ill-being, then we can say that every violation is a rebellion against the well-being of creation. Of course, where she's going to go with this next is to ask how is this also then a rebellion against God? And that's the next chapter. So I'll pause here with this one, and then we'll move to chapter 3.